Good afternoon. I know it is after lunch and our sugar high from our wonderful desserts had worn off and the coffee hasn't kicked in yet, but bear with me and hopefully we can have a good session together, and hopefully I can glean some information for you to be able to use in your practice or whatever you're doing in regards to individuals who need your help so desperately. My name is Felicia Jordan, and I'm a staff attorney at Disability Rights Florida. And for those who never heard of us, we are the protection and advocacy agency for the state of Florida. So we basically provide advocacy services / legal services for individuals with a disability throughout the state of Florida. We do not charge our clients for our services. So basically, it's a matter of calling, getting through intake, and if there's a particular type of case that we can possibly help you with, and you're an individual with a disability or helping someone with a disability, we could try to do our best to help. Okay, so basically what I'm doing today is Adulting 101, not Adultery 101. I was getting that. When I original title for this presentation was, I called it WTF based on the first 3 letters of the words. And they thought that was a little too provocative. So I was like, oh, well, maybe, because everybody's going to be, it's about being an adult. So maybe I could change that. And then it somehow got changed to Adultery 101. I'm like, I'm not teaching that part. I don't know anything about that. So hopefully we could be able to do it. So today what we're doing is, our learning objectives is we'll learn what transition services are. And one of the things at Disability Rights Florida is that we're really trying to push strongly for is the transition services, the students between 14 and 26, because they're in a really, really vulnerable position and they have a lot to learn in a short period of time. Okay, so we want to look at those services and who are required to provide them and what should they do to help what they're supposed to help that student accomplish. And we're going to identify those priority issues. So we're going to what to look for in the school to work transition. So from the school to hopefully getting our student a job, what are we supposed to be looking for? And if they're SSI or SSDI beneficiary, what we're going to look out for in those areas. Also, organizations and resources to help manage potentially complicated transition issues. Because with students, especially ones with disabilities, the transition process is not always easy. So what we want to do is basically try to help you have some breadcrumbs, and if you need us, we'll even give you more guidance in regards to trying to help your young person transition from school to work. So it's the 18th birthday, yay, right? Party, balloon hats, cake, adulthood. Okay, wait a minute. What happens? So yes, that individual's all grown up. So legally, once they reach the age of 18, they're considered the age of majority. Now, I don't know anybody else, but I know myself at 18, I thought I knew everything and knew nothing. So I don't know about, I can only speak for myself, but that's what I was at 18. I thought I knew everything and knew nothing. So but the law says we're legally entitled to make our own decisions unless you're under a guardianship or some type of guardianship advocacy or something to that effect. So what can we do to help our young person transition? So we're going to help them transition to adulthood. So we're looking at education and training, employment, and community resources. Okay, so transition. So by 16, the student is supposed to be under IDEA, that's the Individuals with Disability Education Act. By 16, they're required to have a plan, okay? Through the school district, they're supposed to have a plan. In Florida, we start at age 14. So as 14 years old, they're supposed to have what they call a Transition Individualized Education Plan, or a TIEP. So they're supposed to start this at age 14. That's our magic number, 14, okay? And basically they're supposed to start having these activities. What are they gonna do from school to work? Now, unfortunately, I've seen IEPs or TIEPs where they have, oh, well, Billy will at 2 years from now upon graduation have a 4-year degree and live independently, the end. Yeah, how's that supposed to happen? okay? How's that process supposed to happen? And there's nothing in there about how that process is supposed to happen. So we got to look at post-school activities, education, where is this student going? We're looking at vocational education, integrated employment. If we have a student that is impacted and needs supported employment and need a job coach or someone to help them learn job skills, then we're supposed to bring that in. And at 14, we want services starting at 14 to be able to enforce that. So we're supposed to take our young people with disabilities from childhood to adulthood, and we want them to be from being dependent to independent as most as possible, both socially and financially. So we're moving from IDEA or 504 plans to vocational rehabilitation services. Now, we also got to look at that, because when we do it, it may affect their Social Security benefits, and it may affect their health care benefits. So what we're going to do today is look at all of those things to see what we can do and best try to organize that for our transitional individual. So what plans should they cover? What they want to do in life? What is their goals? What are their abilities? Okay? How can we prepare them? And we got to look at what those needs are. Okay? And we have to look at that, and not only through the education, we look at vocational education as well, vocational training, and the social services. Okay, so schools and vocational programs are supposed to have a hand in that. And they're supposed to provide services for youth between 16 and 22. And again, like I said, in the state of Florida, we have 14. The other document I attached in the app is basically a memorandum of understanding between the Bureau of Special Education, Vocational Rehabilitation, and the Division of Blind Services, where they're supposed to provide that service, and they agreed to it. So I provided that just in case if you have to go to an educational meeting for your young person, that you would have that in front of you, because in that particular document, it says within 3 days of the school inviting them, one of those VR or DBS, whichever applies to that child or young adult, supposed to be showing up at that meeting. And they either show up in person, over the phone, or with email providing information. And some schools will give you a little pushback, but that basically is like the little magic ticket to say, hey, this is what you're required to do. Okay, so we look at those two documents, and it's going to be confusing because I'm going to be using acronyms, but it's going to be a confusing acronym, and trust me, I confuse them myself sometimes. So we look at the IEP, that's the Individualized Education Plan, and that's basically from the school. That is basically what the school looks at in regards to having special education services with a student with disabilities. And then we have the IPE, and that's the Individualized Plan for Employment. So basically that particular document is developed by the Vocational Rehabilitation Agency, and that looks at what kind of outcome of employment that individual wants to have at the end of that process. So you need to have both of these documents in order to basically have a roadmap of where you want your student to go. Okay, so our transitions, yes. The school can do the invite, and you can also apply, and I'm going to show you to you a little later. Don't worry, I'll get to it as much as possible, okay? So transition services is a set of activities for the student. We're looking at outcomes. We're looking at post-school activities, education, training, if they need supportive employment, adult education, independent living, and community participation. So we're looking at all of those factors. And we're looking at those because we got to take their needs into account, their interests, their preferences, what instruction they're going to need, what community experiences they're going to need, how do we develop that employment, how do we develop that adult post-living objective. So we have to look at all of those things. So we're looking at it through guidance and counseling, on-the-job training experiences, vocational training programs, including college. A lot of people leave that out when they look at vocational. There is college also on the table. We look at assistive technology devices if that individual needs it, and many other services. I provided some case law in regards to transition services, what should be provided through the school district. And basically, I'm provided from different states, but basically a lot of these particular case law that I provided will show that school has certain responsibilities to a student within a certain time frame before they turn age 22 and no longer allowed to attend school under the free and appropriate public education. Okay, so our Florida Vocational Rehabilitation Agencies, we have two. One is called the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, and basically they provide services to an individual with disabilities and require vocational services to prepare for, enter in, engage, or retain, so even if they're working, to help them retain that job, gainful employment. The second one we have is the Division of Blind Services. So to qualify for this one, the individual would have to have a visual impairment that is qualified under the Florida statute. Okay, so the vocational rehabilitation process. Now what I provided for you is both the applications for the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation and the Division of Blind Services. This is the link to go to those applications directly so you can start that process for the individual. So one of them is basically going to be a referral for vocational rehabilitation. They're going to have you go to an orientation, and then you do the formal application, and then with the Division of Blind Services is straight application. Yes? We're going to get to that. I'm coming, don't worry, I'm coming. Okay, so they don't have to do it alone. They can also, the individual with a disability that needs help, they can basically select or appoint by court a personal representative to work with them with vocational rehabilitation so that they can speak to the counselor on their behalf if need be, okay? And the application must be designated to a counselor. We as Disability Rights Florida can help with that process, and what we do is what we call a supervised referral, and we can assist in starting that process for your transition age young person that needs that assistance. Okay, eligibility. In vocational rehabilitation, you have to be eligible for services, and it has to be made within 60 days. This is a federal time frame, so it has to be done within 60 days, period. An extension could be sought, but the person has to agree to it, and they have to note it down that that person agreed to it. If you don't agree, which you don't have to, they have to be done in 60 days, okay? Okay, so they must have legal status and authority to work in the U.S. They must be present in the state, and they could be presumption, if they're already Social Security beneficiaries, they're already presumed to be eligible. So if your transition age individual is already receiving Social Security, they're presumed to be eligible for the services already. So there's nothing really else to do because they presume to be eligible. Yes? No, 60 days from when they apply. Yes?
When you say Social Security, are you talking about SSI?
SSI or SSDI. Okay. Survivor benefits, not so much. They would still have to go through the evaluation process, but we'll go into if they're eligible as under what we call a DAC in a little bit. Okay, so the eligible disabilities that we have for this is a mental health disorder, chemical dependency, adjustment disorders, intellectual disabilities, specific learning disabilities, hearing, speech, or visual impairments. Okay, so we're also looking at physical disabilities as well. Now, DVR has what they call order of selection. So for one period of time, if they didn't have enough money or resources to be able to serve everyone in the state, they had an order of selection, and they did it from 1, 2, and 3. So what happened was, if you showed that you had most significant disability, you were put in category 1 and you were serviced right away. 2, they would consider you to have a significant disability and you were served next. And 3, you were basically considered, category 3 was an individual with a disability and you were served last. You were sometimes put on a wait list. Now, from what we understood in February of this year, we were told that basically the category 3, the wait list is only like a couple of months or so it's not as long as it used to be. So 1 and 2 are open, and those can get services, pretty much right away. But at the same time, the individual who's in category 3 will have to wait a couple of months. But at the same time, if they already have IPE signed prior to 2014, they continue services uninterrupted. So if they were already getting services when they did the category, they still can continue getting services. Okay, so we look at this, and they basically look at the type of services they're going to provide, and if they're waitlisted in school, if they basically reach the category 3 in school, what happens is that they also qualify for other services, which we call pre-employment services, that they can also get through VR while they're still in school and while they're still in category 3, and I'll go through that in a moment. So we also look at their order selection, their functional capabilities, their mobility, their communication, their self-care, their self-direction, their interpersonal skills, their work tolerance, and their work skills. And they have to look at that, all of that in regards to eligibility and where if they're gonna put them on the order of selection, what category. So what type of services they provide? Counseling and guidance, training, physical restoration. So that sometimes could be in forms of a lot of things. Sometimes it's healthcare. I've seen cases where they did gastro bypass. I've seen where people needed prosthetic devices, things like that. We have mental restoration where the individual can get counseling, therapy services, medications, supported employment services. So if they need a job coach, employment services, if they need licenses, tools, if they wanted to become a nurse or if they wanted to become a mechanic, they would help with those supplies and those licenses and those tools, prosthetics and orthotics, technology for rehabilitation. So sometimes if individuals need certain equipment to be able to work, they could basically pay for that. Interpreter services, especially if the person is hard of hearing or deaf. Or if they're, sometimes if it's a different language if needed. Self-employment services, you can start a business with VR. They can assist through a process which they have what they call a certified business technical assistant consultant. So they help people be able to create businesses. So it's not a job that particularly interests you. You can also have them create a business if your abilities and desires are as such. And they also do community-based work experiences as well. So that plan of employment that I told you about, this is a written document that captures your outcome. So you always got to look on that page because you got to look at what that outcome is supposed to be, because that's the difference between somebody who wants to become a lawyer and somebody who wants to become a paralegal. So if they put paralegal on the page and you get that 4-year degree and you want to go to law school, they're like, your employment outcome said legal assistant or paralegal. It did not say lawyer. So you want to make sure that that job outcome that is based on that person's desires, their unique strengths and abilities, and their opportunities has it correct, because otherwise that'd be the difference between having to try to amend that IPE or not be able to get the services that you need to have, okay? Yes?
The IPE plan, is that also the desired age to begin that? Is that also at 14 years old?
Yes. Yes, it would be to start the IPE, we would also suggest to start at age 14. Start inviting them to the IEP meeting at the school. When they start that transition IEP, that's when you want the VR to show up. Okay. Yes.
I'm sorry. And they're allowed to, I think you just alluded to it, they're allowed to change it if they want to, because let's say, per se, it says at 14 this child changes their mind.
Yes.
I think that'd be an issue. Are you going to tell us how we would go about that?
I mean, basically, that's where the communication with the counselor comes in. If that student feels like, okay, based on my unique strengths and abilities, that I don't want to do this particular type of job anymore, or I don't think this fits me anymore, let's look at this. We can always basically discuss it with the counselor and see what kind of coursework or job experiences or something that we can have that student directed to.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we require coordination. We want that IPE for that student who's receiving special education services to be coordinated. So that's why I said 14 years old, start inviting VR to come on down, because you want them at the table when everybody's discussing those students' unique strengths and abilities. You want them at that table, okay? So we look at that time frame again. DBS has a 60-day clock for IPE development. So this is when they get the form, the document itself. So DBS has 60 days, and VR has 90 days. These, again, federal time frames. Okay? These can be extended. Again, they have to have permission in order to extend that time frame. Yes?
From who?
From either the client themselves, which is the student, or the person that they selected to be their personal representative to assist them in the process.
Could that be an educational surrogate?
Yes, if they basically selected you to speak on their behalf and they have a release from VR to speak to you on their behalf, yes, you can be that individual. Okay, so these are federal time frames. From the date they determine eligibility to 90 days later, this has to be in place. Ticket to Work program. Okay, so basically, if we have Social Security beneficiaries, and I know I'm going to break it down a little bit because some people are like, what's the difference between SSI and SSDI? Okay, so SSDI is basically if we work, right, and we work for a living, every year that we work, we get what we call 4 credits. We get 4 credits a year. And what they're looking for us to have is 10 years of work to be fully vested in the Social Security program. So that's either for retirement purposes or getting disability, we're supposed to have the 40 credits if we're over 35. If we're under 35, it's slightly below. So we want to have those work credits for us to be able to be eligible for SSDI. For individuals who are 18 and younger, or individuals who did not have enough work credits, they're eligible for what they call Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. So under that particular individual, they would have a different program where they have financial benefit. However, unlike SSDI, it's financially sensitive. So even if you get things that are not even money related, so if somebody allows you to live with them, right? They consider that what they call in-kind income, and they can reduce your benefit in kind based on the fair market value of you living with that person and not paying them any rent. Okay? So SSI is more financially sensitive, and SSDI, basically they're looking at whether or not you went back to work on a full-time basis. Okay, so the ticket to work is not a physical document. What it is a voucher. And if you go for what they call employment networks, which is VR is one of the employment networks, but they also have other ones throughout the state. And what happens is you have that young person that wants to go to work, but you also want to protect their benefits while they're learning how to go to work. You don't want their benefits to be cut off because they're like, wait a minute, if Johnny goes work at Burger King and he lasts 2 weeks, and he makes a certain amount of money, and he becomes ineligible for benefits, but then he can't work because of either the stress or the anxiety or whatever it may be, what happens to his benefits? So what we do is we get a ticket to work. So we basically we go to an employment network, and we're signing up for services, which VR is one of them, and basically they take what they call a ticket. And they basically get a reimbursement from Social Security Disability for participating in that program. And what that does is it protects the students' benefits for about 36 months while they're trying to learn how to work. So it kind of protects the benefits a little bit while they're trying to do these attempts. So they don't get penalized for trying to learn to work. Okay, so we have WIPAs, Work Incentive Planning and Assistance Programs. So they don't just leave you out there without help. So what happens is with the WIPA programs is that these are basically work incentives. So for Social Security beneficiaries, they try to transition from benefits to earning, and these are organizations that basically have coordinators that counsel you on what to do and give you the ins and outs of benefits and planning while you're trying to get benefits and figure out what happens when you try to go back to work. So we have 4 in the state of Florida, and I listed them out for you. Okay, Clearwater, outside of Cocoa, Orlando, and in Jacksonville. Okay, so what kicks the benefits off? Okay, so we have what we call a trial work period. You can attempt to go back to work, but what happens is, as they look for you, they give you 9 months, and these do not have to be 9 months in a row. It doesn't have to be consecutive. They're looking at 60-month period, 5 years of you trying to go back to work. And if there's any point in time where you make over $850, it triggers it in the system for that quarter that you made what they call SGA, substantial gainful activity, meaning that you made more than $850. So that triggers, boop, month 1. Okay? So you can work maybe in January, and then try again in July, and then try again in December. And basically, each one of those months, if you make more than $850, that triggers 3 months of your 9-month trial work period. Okay? If you exhaust the whole 9 months, they have a 36-month period where they can still obtain benefits if they don't earn more than that $850 after that. But also, if they don't earn more than that, which is $1,180, for people who are not blind, and $1,970 if they are blind, then basically you don't have to go through the reapplication process all over again. So rather than have to apply all over again, if you find that your individual cannot work within that 36-month period, you can just alert Social Security and say, look, I need you to trigger this back in. I need you to have the extended period of eligibility. This individual does not need to reapply. We need to just have them put back in for benefit services. Okay? Now, that $1,180, we want to reduce that if we possibly can, right? So how do we go about doing that? So we look at work expenses. Because if they still have the disability, they're still trying to go to work, but just like we all do, it costs money to go to work. Every day we go, we pay for gas, whatever insurance, whatever we do on a day-to-day basis to get from our jobs and work our jobs every day. So what we do is, in this case, this individual going back to work, is that basically we can deduct it down. So out of that $1,180, we can use service animals, the cost for the service animals, cost for their medications, cost for their medical supplies and devices, personal care assistance, transportation, modifications for vehicles. As long as they're not reimbursed by an employer or someone else, we basically subtract it down, so then they make less than SGA. Am I losing anybody? We all good? We're Fonzies? We're cool? Yes.
You talked about two different amounts. You talked about an $850 and an $1,180.
Mm-hmm.
So what?
The 1180 is the big number. That's substantial gainful activity that applies to both SSI and SSDI. The 850 is more geared toward SSI because you actually get less money. Okay?
Another question.
Yes.
For SSDI, then you have 40 quarters.
40 quarters, and there's other ways to do that. And I'll talk about that in a minute, about how a young person may be able to qualify for Social Security.
How do they get those 40 quarters?
Exactly. Okay, so also we could look at subsidies. So for example, if somebody gets a job coach and they have a job coach on the job with them to help them learn how to do that job, they can also decrease the amount of their earnings, or Social Security counts the decrease of the amount of their earnings because they have that job coach no matter who paid for it. So if they had a job coach helping them on the job because they need supported employment services, then they're gonna count that cost of that job coach off the top of the gross amount of the earnings, so that can reduce it also under SGA. Okay. Continuation of Medicare. Okay, if we have somebody who's a beneficiary and still disabled and they lose their benefits because they made too much money, then they can continue up to 93 months, 7 years and 9 months of receiving Medicare Part A. Okay? If they get SSDI, they can still continue on Medicare. And you're like, but what about Medicaid? What about that? Okay, state of Florida has what they call a state benefit. Their state benefit for SSI is Medicaid. So legally, as long as your individual still gets $1 in SSI benefits, they still qualify for Medicaid. Okay? Now, these are some of the other exclusions under SSI. Basically, when they start calculating the money, they take $65 off the top. But the other thing we have to look at is if they're a student. If they're under 22 and still attending school, they don't look at the 1180. they look at 1820. Okay? So you look at that amount if they're still in school and under 22. So if they're still in school, high school, and they're under age 22, and they're working to try to attempt to work and learn how to work, we're looking at that dollar amount in regards to the exclusion for SSI. Okay, we talked about impairment-related expenses, and that could be deducted, and we talked about that, and that also applies to SSI. So we have a pop quiz. Arnold's receiving SSA benefits. He's working at Tri-County Sheltered Workshop, and he's receiving an average of $425 a month. Is he still eligible for benefits? Okay, it won't work for me. All right, yes he is, because A, he's in a sheltered workshop, because A, he would have the job coach and everything, and also he's under SGA. So Arnold is working at the local Motel 6, earning the same income. Would he be eligible for benefits? Yep, because he's still making under that magical number. PASS programs. These are programs where people can set aside benefits in order to work the work goal. So some people with SSDI like, look, I want to start this business. I know if I bring this business to the market, everybody's going to be on it, and I know I can do it. And they're like, well, if you're willing to put in some money for it, you know, so DVR will help. But what they can do also is have a PASS program. So if they're eligible for SSI, they could set aside the SSDI funds, the money they get every month, and then basically just accept SSI and use that SSDI money for their business. But that has to be set up in advance by the Social Security Administration, and they have a PASS cadre in Birmingham, Alabama. So if you don't already have that plan in place, you can't just run out and start your business and think that that's going to happen. And you also got to account for that money that you're using it for business expenditures. Trust me, I've had that happen. A poor client of mine came in, and that's what happened to him. Fortunately for him, he was able to account for every dollar he spent, and he was able to get his benefits reinstated. But you want to make sure that if you're using that PASS program, that whatever money that you're using in the PASS program for the SSCDI funds or for that business that you're trying to start or having started. Expedited reinstatement. So if the benefits are basically you're making SGA, and within 5 years of you losing the benefits, you can be reinstated if you no longer work. You don't have to reapply all over again. Okay? They can do temporary benefits for 6 months while they do your eligibility. So that way you don't have to start all over again. I don't know how many people ever started a Social Security application or helped somebody with a Social Security application before. You know how long it is, right? Okay, so this is one way to help expedite that process. Okay, WIOA, basically this is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And so basically this was signed in by President Obama in July 22nd, 2014. And basically it was trying to help individuals with disabilities be able to go to work. So, as I was stating earlier, when I talked about if they were in school and they were 14 years old and basically they're waiting for eligibility and they could still be eligible for some services from VR, this is it right here, the pre-employment transition services. So basically, it increases services to youth, and they're required to do this. They emphasize for them to have more opportunities to have workplace skills, consider their career interests, get more real work experiences, and basically get good jobs and careers. That is the purpose of this particular legislation, was to help the individual not just get a regular job, but get a career as well, okay? And it helped them earn while they learn. So these are the services that they can get. Job exploration counseling, work-based experiences. Sometimes school districts call them community-based instruction, or CBI, where they go to the school and they be able to work in different environments to get acclimated to different work environments. Counseling in regards to transition, post-secondary education programs of higher education, workplace readiness to develop social skills and independent living. So VR not only can help with the work situation, they can also help with the social skills. They do peer mentoring, they have other programs and developments that they can have to help that individual learn how to be in social interactions in a workplace environment. Youth with a disability, as defined in WIOA, is a person with a disability who is in the ages between 14 and 24. They will be eligible for VR services. Now, this is where it gets good. 15% of each state's public vocational rehabilitation funds must now be used on pre-employment services. They have to spend at least 15% of their budget. This is in addition to transition services. If they don't use it, they lose it. Okay, so this is important. If they don't use it, they lose it. So basically, this is where the push comes in. DVR and DBS should participate actively throughout the transition process, not just when the student is nearing graduation. We hear that time and time again from different schools and things that tell us, oh, we have to wait until they turn age 22. Or the counselor told us, the VR counselor told us that we had to wait till age 22. No. 14, 14, 14. Okay? They're expected to provide some service, at least to some students in disability, while they're in school. Okay? And the services they have must be promote or facilitate the achievement of an employment outcome identified in the student's IPE. So we're working toward that goal. Once we get that IPE document made, then all our services that we're working towards is to get that student to that goal. Okay, yes, yes.
I'm a guardian ad litem.
Mm-hmm.
A student who just turned 16, and she was just moved into the high school in the fall. And her IEP meeting's coming up. I'm concerned about vocational things down the line for this particular student. And they told me, well, she's too young now to get started on that.
No. That's why I included that little memo in the application, the GAL gap app, so that way you can also show that no, it says 14, and that it says within that time frame on this memo that when the school invited, you're supposed to show up. And 16 is not too young.
Okay? Do you have a phone number for us to call to?
I have it here. Okay, I'll get to it. Okay, so basically the congressional intent was to focus on the most vulnerable workers, low-income adults and youth who have limited skills, and they increase their job skills, career pathways, and basically try to get more employer engagement. So we look at these things and we basically, it encourages individuals to have customized employment, and they also pay for advanced training. That's the other, misnomer that goes around the little rumor. Oh, we don't pay for that after a bachelor's degree or associate's degree. Not true. If you want an advanced degree, or the student needs an advanced degree in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, medicine, law, or business, in order to meet their employment outcome, guess what? They can pay for it. Okay, I can tell you from personal experience, we had law school cases. It was like, you got to come up with the money. WIOA says so. Okay? Okay, so we also look at sheltered workshops. They cannot just plunk a student into a sheltered workshop because they say, oh, he has a certain IQ, or he or she has a certain IQ, and that's it. No, what they are required to do, the VR is required to do, is before they have them in a sheltered workshop, they must do a series of pre-employment transition services. They have to start that first. Try that out first before they even consider a sheltered workshop. And even if that student winds up in a sheltered workshop, they're supposed to review that semi-annually to see if that's the correct placement for that individual anymore. So they have to see whether or not every year if that individual is eligible for competitive employment, meaning making more than minimum wage, or at least minimum wage. Okay, SSI redetermination. This is what you're going to get a lot, especially as soon as your transition age student turns 18. At 18, a review is scheduled to determine whether or not that condition or illness meets Social Security Administration's definition of disability for an adult. So prior to age 18, they're being found disabled under a child. They're using listings and rules and regulations for a child. Once they turn 18, that changes. So they have adult standards. The adult standards are a little more loosey. So basically, it shows an inability to perform any job that exists in substantial numbers in the national or local economy. So they basically have to meet the standards of having less than sedentary work on a physical basis or unable to meet simple unskilled work on a mental basis. Okay? So the rules change from a child to an adult. So when the case is reviewed, they look at all medical, vocational, and education services. And these can come from doctors, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, naturopaths, chiropractors, therapists, and social workers. It used to be they would look more for the MDs or the PsyDs or the PhDs, but then they opened it up a little bit because everybody get treatment in a different type of arena. So they have to look at those things. They look at those particular documents in order to see whether or not that individual is still disabled. If you don't have recent records of medical treatment, vocational services, or education services, that may result in a finding that that illness or condition is no longer disabling for that SSI recipient. So this is where it comes in, where the important part of documentation. Sometimes people are like, well, where do we get some of that documentation from? Some of it is, yes, you're going to have that medical treatment from taking that student to the doctor. What about the educational services? Okay, here's the other thing that we run into sometimes. Somebody had not had, a student may not have had a reevaluation in 10 years. That's not supposed to happen. In the state of Florida, an IEP team is supposed to reconsider, at least consider reevaluation every 3 years. So you want to have your student or every 3 years, or if they have a condition or a situation that changes that requires that reevaluation, if it comes up before the 3 years happens, okay? What we want to do is before we leave school, we want that to have in place. We want to update it. Because I've seen evaluations where they did neuropsychological evaluations and it was the individuals in preschool, and now they're like 15 years old. And nothing was done in between. And all kinds of educational gains have happened, all kinds of situations has happened, and none of that was basically marked down in that evaluation process, and it wasn't reevaluated. I had one student where she was in that particular situation. They did not reevaluate her for 10 years. She was reading on a first grade level. We had her move schools, and within a space of like less than 6 months, because we had to get her right before she could graduate, she went from a first grade reading level to a 6th grade reading level. Okay? So that's what you want to do, is make sure you have this documentation as much as possible. Transitioning youth, see doctors, participate in these trainings, especially if there's no recommended type of treatment for that condition. Okay? You provide them access to the medical, vocational, and education reports. You want to make sure they have that documentation, because if they don't have it, they're not going to go look for it, and your individual will be no longer found or considered disabled. Okay? You want to give them as much as you possibly can. Okay, we have a redetermination regulation regarding that a student who's between 18 and 22 years old. Basically, they can use IEPs. In a regular adult type of determination for Social Security, they would not use IEPs, but an individual who's 18 to 22, they can. So you need to have the latest ones as much as possible to show that this student is still a student that requires special education services, and they're still in need, and they still should be considered disabled. Okay, we also look at students from 18 to 25 to be considered young adults, so they use that same criteria, but they do take consideration from non-medical sources. So if you have a school social worker or a social worker, therapist, vocational coaches, family members, they can use that as also documentation or proof of evidence that this individual is still disabled and should not have their benefits ceased just because they turned 18. Warning. Loss of SSI benefits for finding of a youth is no longer disabled will result in the loss of Medicaid waiver services, including developmentally disabled waiver. So you got to make sure that you protect that. Also, warning, living arrangements and food provided by family may be considered in-kind income that affect eligibility for SSI. So if they turn over 18 and they're not paying rent for somewhere, and they're not paying fair market rent somewhere, that can be considered in-kind income, and that can reduce their Social Security SSI benefits, okay? All right, David is 19 years old. He's a student who still attends high school. He has an intellectual disability of full-scale IQ of 65. What documentation can you use to determine an eligible for Social Security benefits? The IEP. Come on, what else? Psychoeducational evaluations, what else? Counseling report, what else? Medical records, there we go. We need the documentation. Yes, the ESC, the IEP from the ESC teacher, or documents or reports from the ESC teacher. All of those things come into play because whoever's going to look at it, either through DDS on the lower level or at ALJ on the higher level, you want to have those documents in place. So that way, they don't have to go look for it. There it is in front of their face. Okay, continue payment under VR or similar program 301. So if they're finding that person is no longer disabled, then the Section 301 will allow the SSI benefit to continue to receive SSI benefits, including Medicaid. This protects them while they're in VR. If they're getting vocational rehabilitation services and they're deemed no longer to be disabled, and this is different from the Ticket to Work program. This is where they already had a finding of them saying, oh, you're no longer disabled. What do we do now? This is it, 301. Okay, so we go to the 301 in order to protect their benefits while they're participating in a vocational rehabilitation program or similar service. Okay, so we look at it. We can use a Ticket to Work. We can use the IPE from a private vocational rehabilitation agency. They do have those in the state of Florida. We could look at a PASS program if they're trying to start their own business, or an IEP. We look at those, and basically, if they're already participating in that program, basically it protects their benefits while during this time of cessation. So if they cut their benefits off and say, oh, you're no longer deemed disabled, this is what you use is the 301, Section 301, okay? In order to try to keep them to get benefits, because what happens, how much money we need in order to be able to qualify for Medicaid under SSI in the state of Florida? $1. Protected Medicaid. So if the cash benefits are lost because the childhood disability benefit exceeds the income of SSI, then we can also try to keep Medicaid to be preserved. And you're like, well, what are you talking about? Okay, so if somebody turns 18 and basically their parents, and we'll get into that, basically we used to call it DAC, it's called Childhood Disability Benefit. So they turn 18 years old, right? And they consider this to be disabled by Social Security before age 22. That's the magic number. They have to be considered disabled before age 22. So if their parents are considered to be disabled, retired, or deceased, and they have those insured workers, they have that 40 credits, right? What happens is you can file that application for adult benefit, and they can be considered what we call a DAC, or formerly known as a DAC. So they would get SSDI benefits, not SSI benefits, because they would get it under their parents' record. And you're like, well, how do I find that out? Ask. All you have to do is ask. When you apply, you ask, especially if they're in a foster situation or some other situation, ask. Find out if their parents are receiving SSDI benefits from Social Security, or they're receiving retirement benefits under Social Security, or they're deceased and they were insured workers. That child could qualify for SSDI under their parents' record, even though they did not work those 40 credits themselves. Okay? Now, here's the kick. They have to be unmarried. If they get married to someone who is not also receiving Social Security disability benefits, all of this goes away. It goes bye-bye because they got married to an individual without who is not receiving Social Security disability benefits themselves. Yes?
What if the parental rights are terminated? Do the kids still?
They still could qualify. I mean, usually they try to show that there's some sort of dependency situation, but because if you can show that they were on the birth certificate, they were the parent of record, you could try to do that, even if the benefits are terminated. Okay, any other questions? Yes? That's a tricky one. Because I think at that point, it would consider the adoptive parents' records versus the biological parents' records. You could try it, but I haven't had that situation quite work. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, moving forward. Eligibility, over 18, they have a blindness or disability that began before age 22. They're entitled to receive those benefits on their parents' records, and they will lose SSI. So what happens is we want to do protective Medicaid for them to keep their Medicaid benefits. Why? Because in order for you to get Medicare, you have a 24-month waiting period. So basically, they have 24 months of once you qualify for SSDI, if you're under the age of 65, where you have no medical insurance whatsoever. So what we do is ask for protected Medicaid in order for them to keep a medical insurance while we're waiting for Medicare to kick in. Got it? All right, moving forward. All right, 1619B, Medicaid while working. An individual who earns enough income to become ineligible for SSI still can maintain Medicaid with health benefits. So basically, it reinstates, if they basically protects the individual, reinstatement of SSI benefits, should countable income decline, and protects the eligibility under the state's Medicaid waiver programs while working. So in order to qualify for that, they have to have a disability, meet all SSI eligibility requirements, accept the accountable earned income, have received SSI for the previous month, need the Medicaid, and have not had earnings that will replace the SSI benefit, the Medicaid benefit, or any personal care assistance paid for by public funds. So post-secondary education support and services. Basically, we talked about, you guys already probably noticed about the extended foster care program. Basically started on January 1st, 2014. You have a choice to stay in foster care until age 21. Gives you living options and a support network. And young adults with a diagnosed and documented disability may continue to reside in extended foster care until their 22nd birthday. Okay. They can reside in licensed foster care, attend high school, or working on a GED, enrolled in college or vocational education program, employed for at least 80 hours a month, participate in a program designed to promote or eliminate barriers to employment, and have a diagnosed, documented disability that prevent that young adult from participating in any, or basically having a disability that prevents you from doing any of the above situations, working or going to school. Our checklist. So we start early. We start our well-managed transition services at 14. We apply to the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation or the Division of Blind Services at 14. We invite a representative from the appropriate vocational rehabilitation agency to the IEP meetings. We want that coordinated, both on the IEP and the IPE. We want that coordinated in regards to what that student wants to do once they leave secondary school. We apply for the services that they can get, waiver services, VR services, any services they're eligible to get. And we seek assistance. We contact the WIPA. You contact us if you have questions about that. Seek assistance in regards to overpayment of Social Security benefits. We do that. We provide for that service. If there's an overpayment due to work, and if work is a barrier, if it's a barrier to employment, we can assist with the overpayment. But it has to be a barrier to employment. We can't do eligibility per se, but we can help with that process. Have them continue to see doctors to understand disabling conditions, medical conditions. We need to have that documentation. If we don't have it, it don't exist. Determine if they can handle their own benefits and money. If they don't, we need somebody to help them. They do have what they call representative payees. That's a long story. That's a whole nother workshop altogether. We identify accommodations they would need in employment and in post-secondary education. And remember that earning wages will cause SSI benefits to decrease, but it will increase their overall income. And basically, it puts that person with a disability, when they're working, on a path of being an insured worker and also, as much as possible, to independence. Yes.
How do you think it's appropriate to handle a situation where they qualify first at foster care and receiving funds because they're attending school, but then they got into some of the legalcy issues, and so they were in a program, and we weren't sure exactly what to do with their money?
What do you mean?
Like, you know how you get like a stipend a month as long as you're enrolled in school? I think it was under the PES program.
Mm-hmm.
And so they weren't able to receive their, necessarily receive their disbursements because they were at a residential program because of the delinquency issues.
But are they receiving educational or vocational services under that program?
Right, they were.
They are receiving it. Ooh, I'll have to look at that a little closer, but depending on, I have to look at the paperwork to see what the situation is, but if they're receiving educational and vocational services, I think that would follow under the line, but I would just have to look at the paperwork to see it closer. Okay. How we assist. So we advocate on the rights of needs of people with disabilities, both with vocational rehabilitation agencies, and we also address employment discrimination, reasonable accommodation, work-related transportation, Center for Independent Living, Social Security work incentives and WIPAs, employment networks, and other barriers to employment. And basically, that's our phone number and our webpage that you can reach us. And I am Z. Felicia Jordan, and if anybody has any questions, yes. You can still do it until prior to age 22. Well, you have to be enrolled in school. You have to be enrolled in school because that's the only way they could be liable for the fact that they did or did not provide a free, appropriate public education. So you would have to have them enrolled into school and then basically request those services so that way they could start getting that specially designed instruction that they need and outline all of those things in regards. That is hard. It depends. Legally, they're supposed to identify. They have something called child fine, where they're supposed to have an obligation to identify that student in need of services. But the problem we're going to be is that he or she is no longer in school. So they're no longer, they're no longer enrolled in school, no longer our problem, because, they have the mandatory attendances only to age 16. So that'll be something that if you could persuade the student to give it another try or give it another shot for them in order to get the services they need in order to get the education that they need. Okay, the IEP, okay, so the IPE is through vocational rehabilitation. So basically they would have to go to vocational rehabilitation and apply for their services and be found eligible. So that's something different. No.
Let's mention about the school though. If the student left, had an IEP, individual educational plan, and left prior to graduating with a regular diploma, they can always go back to school until they're 21. So, and a lot of times kids don't understand what that means about whether they've gotten a regular diploma. Lots of different things in Florida are called sort of diplomas, but.
Yeah. Yes.
I have a question
Oh. Okay, yes, no problem. Okay. All right, well, Pat, pass the mic. Okay.
Regarding parents, if parents are disabled and have children, does the Florida Disability Rights assist them as well?
We do assist parents with disabilities, yes.
Okay, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to go into dependency.
No, we don't require that. All you have to do is be an individual with a disability.
Okay. Question?
Okay, I guess way over there. Yes.
Good afternoon. My question is, earlier in the presentation, you talked about the applications and the timeframes. In the event that, because we know this never happens, that the agencies don't operate within their timeframes, what is the remedy for an attorney or a representative to seek to enforce or to seek restitution for that?
Oh, those are varied. One, they can basically talk to the counselor, let them know that they understand that. Or two, if you have an attorney that wants to handle it themselves, they can address that issue in DOA, the Division of Administrative Hearings, and basically, file on that person's behalf. We house the Client Assistance Program at Disability Rights Florida, and we have attorneys and advocate investigators that will assist in that process for that person with an individual disability.
I understand. Can I follow on with that? Because
Yes.
The DOA, that's essentially the process. But
Yes.
say the advocate prevails for the child, what remedy other than, hey, you need to get this done, would be provided for the child?
Well, Congress in its remedial scheme of RCA law or Rehabilitation Services Act did not give a private right to sue. So there's no damages that could be incurred. An injunction can work, but it's not so much as monetary damages per se for that individual. So that would not be something that an individual under RSA would be able to avail themselves upon.
I understand. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Yes.
Couldn't you ask and be awarded attorney's fees in a DOA action?
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
If you're a prevailing party, you can. Yes. Oh, can you pass it?
So can you avoid that magic number with your earnings if you have an ABLE account?
ABLE accounts are more complicated. I can't really get into, because PALMS has a lot of information in regards to the ABLE account. In regards to that, because I know that one of the things you can't do is just use that in order to avoid or basically keep benefits going. But with that, it's really, I would have to be on a case-by-case basis and look at it, because with the ABLE account, it has a lot of different criteria that Social Security through its PALMS requires, and it's even on a month-to-month kind of basis in regards to withdrawals and everything, that I would have to look at that closer and look at the documentation on that. That couldn't be a vanilla answer on that one. That would have to be catered to that individual.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Comments? Complaints? Okay, well, I thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope I was able to help. Thank you, and you have a great rest of your day.